Okay, good evening, everyone. This is time and place set for the second half of the special master plan meeting. And I think we will call the meeting to order as soon as the commissioner sits down here, and we'll introduce ourselves, starting with Mr. Murphy. For the record.
Joseph Murphy, Director of Planning.
Matt Lambert, DPC Co-Design.
Clyde Esbury.
Charlene Douglas, City Commissioner.
Tim Twing, Director of Community Development.
Josh Markham, City Attorney's Office.
Woody Gontina.
Jim Ellison.
And I'm Gary Casada, the chairperson. All right, so before we get started, it turns out, this is a mea culpa because I got some sort of a reprimand here from the legal department, which is embarrassing to me, but apparently this is a continuation of yesterday's meeting, and I asked for a motion to adjourn, which was incorrect. It should have been a motion for a recess, and so in order to pull me out of the fire here, I would ask one of the commissioners to consider making a motion to strike the word from the record adjourn and replace it with the word recess to correct the error that was made yesterday, if anyone is interested to do that.
Since I made the motion, I will move to amend the motion we passed last night to strike the word adjourn and insert recess into the motion. That clearly was my intention, was to continue to today's meeting. So if that's acceptable, that is my motion.
All right, is there a second?
I'll second.
Second by Commissioner Douglas. The motion by Mr. Gontina to strike the word adjourn and replace with recess from the motion that ended the meeting last night. Is there any further discussion of this motion by the commissioners? All right, I will call for the voice vote. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Seeing none, motion passes. Record is cleared up. We can sleep. All right. So this is part two. Yesterday we had people submit questions, and we did our best to answer them. We had a lot of questions. Today we were going to do further discussion and hear the feedback from the public, and that's really what's on the agenda today. But I am going to first turn this over to Tim and make sure that I have us on the right track.
Well, you do have a memo from the Planning Division that highlights process and the steps. There are some suggestions in that memo if you would like Mr. Murphy to go through those first and have some discussion on those items between staff and Mr. Lambert and yourselves, and then you can go from there.
All right, I'd be happy to do that. Mr. Murphy, you prepared to do so?
Sure.
Please proceed.
Let me get a working mic. Try either of these. Either of these. No. Neither of these.
That one works.
Ah, they both work. Only need one. We did highlight in our memo to you different points of interest that we felt were noteworthy to bring to your attention. It's also to stimulate conversation. So I can bring that up on the screen, and if you'd like, we can go through some of those. Hopefully you've had an opportunity to review our comments and provide your own thoughts. If you concur, if you disagree, but it's to bring to your attention some of the items in the document that are of importance, and I can bring that up on the screen right now. So our intent is to show the segments as we discuss them, to show them on the screen, and it'll be helpful to our conversation. We'll also refer to, as everyone does on their daily basis, Google and Google Maps, so that we know which sites we're looking at, and we can look at some aerial photographs too. As Matt had noted in a prior meeting, one of the most important things of the master plan is to identify future land use categories and then have those correspond to a future land use map. So that should be a large focus of your meeting tonight. And I'll bring up the categories that are and the description of each of those. The map itself, I think the map could benefit from showing some property lines, and that would help distinguish between recommended properties where that, so to speak, that line or that boundary between one future land use category or another is drawn. So if it's capable, if it's possible rather, I think it would benefit from property lines. And I know there may be an opportunity to create an online version where people could select individual properties and it would have a database associated with it that would indicate what that is. Because there are so many properties within the city, I think to the tune of over 27,000 individual pieces of property, that could benefit people being able to distinguish their property or their neighbor's property from one from another. We'll jump right into the map if you're okay with that. So there's the suggestion for, we'll start with the areas of growth. There's the downtown designation, future land use designation. That differs slightly from what we currently have in the existing master plan with the future land use designation of downtown. So you'll see that the downtown designation extends a little further north on 11 Mile, north of 11 Mile on Main Street as well as on Washington, and it stops short of going south from where it currently does. We've made some notes in the report that identify that and some of the designations of schools, parks and schools versus, schools versus those different from downtown and from the mixed-use corridor. I don't know, I know that the Downtown Development Authority has been provided this section of the future land use map as well as the documentation in the document itself, and they may very well have some comments with regard to that. But I don't know how the Planning Commission feels with regard to we'll say the shift north regarding the downtown designation. And we can certainly look at that category as well in terms of what that means for development versus what's there now, if you'd like.
But if it's helpful, oh, go ahead, Chair.
Commissioner Douglas.
So so we've got the downtown designation, but we also have the tax increment finance area, which is different from downtown. How will those two elements play out in this change?
The TIF district boundaries wouldn't change at all. That wouldn't impact the DDA's TIF boundaries, but it certainly would categorize some of the developments that are currently built, like the senior high-rise, would be in a mixed-use corridor instead of the downtown corridor, downtown category now, and it would exceed the recommended height for buildings in the mixed-use corridor. There are some proposed developments on the south side. One comes to mind near Lincoln and Troy Street that may very well be in front of you soon, and that would certainly exceed what's referenced as a mixed-use corridor versus what it is now downtown.
So one of the things about downtown zoning is that it does not require parking. How might that affect what's envisioned here? Or maybe I'll ask that to Matt.
Sure. Well, I'll just weigh in on the northern expanse. The reason that we mapped north is the characteristic of the buildings that happen to have recently been built, like next to Imagine, or mostly built, and the buildings just north of there along Main, that those are of the same scale and characteristic of that of the greater downtown, and not the sort of change in scale that happens further north on Main. So that's why that was identified. It does identify downtown zoning as allowable within it, as well as other districts. So it doesn't necessarily suggest that that the zone within those properties would be downtown, therefore not necessarily subject to the parking, the downtown parking standards. So that would have to do with rezonings and so forth. They would be eligible to be rezoned to the downtown zone, but that would take a rezoning process. To the south, I think what we want to figure out is the right place to change that boundary, and that has to do a bit with the change in commercial activity, though the heights are certainly something to consider with the senior housing and other projects that happen down there. Perhaps the mixed-use corridor needs another variation, or it extends further south. I think those are certainly up for discussion.
Okay, thank you.
It would extend further eastward on 4th Street, which is logical given the development pattern, but it currently stops at Knowles, and it would extend a little further eastward.
All right.
And I think we can move on to the mixed-use corridor. That seems to be the next logical progression for areas of growth. Much desire to look at many of our existing commercial corridors and consider them for that category. So you'll see the designations on 11 Mile Road, all areas on South Main Street, and I think new to that would be the mix, that triangular distance between 11 Mile, Sherman, and Woodward Avenue. There's a lot of multifamily in there right now. There's also a strong single-family component. So the mixed-use corridor would allow for all of those varieties of things to continue. There is an existing overlay, if you recall, in that neighborhood, and it's primarily is in this area. If you can see me kind of hovering over on the map, but that would be a relatively new turn for us on the map, and exploring your comfort level with that.
So that was one of the questions that had come up earlier that we didn't address last night, is about that area. You're talking about 11 Mile, Sherman, Woodward, right?
Yes.
Okay, so is that something that came from our consultants or staff, or you guys talked about that? It was a question that was asked to me, so I don't know if the person who asked it is listening out there, but I guess the question would be, what was the process for coming up with that suggestion?
Yeah, that's something that we mapped, and it had to do with the properties sort of straddling between the two roads, and the prevalence of multifamily, though it's not everywhere, and I think that's certainly worth discussion. I was out there earlier today, just sort of triple checking the characteristics, and I could see I think you had questioned especially towards the east side of that designation, and I'm not sure where your the comments and your questions may be for that. In a way, Sherman could be slowed down a bit. I mean, it's not too speedy, it's not too big. It does lack parallel parking on it, and could benefit from a little more friction to stitch that section of neighborhood together. But it has sort of a unique characteristic as having a decent amount, but not a ton, of existing multifamily, and then that sort of space between 11 and Sherman.
All right. I mean, I'm very familiar with that neighborhood, and there's brand-new housing, single-family, there's pretty much
A lot of it.
brand-new multifamily.
Yep.
And it's on both sides of the street, too, or on the north side, it's not new, but anyways, and it was institutional before, because it was a school, it was where Longfellow was. So, I mean, I'm passing on the question, so.
And the same thing can be said for the designation on 13 Mile, all along 13 Mile, from Campbell westward. Many of those segments do have multifamily right now. Quite a few of them are single-family. So again, reading the description of the mixed-use corridor, it wouldn't prohibit single-family residential. It would just allow all those others. So back to the same scenario, and I'll reference the topic of accessory dwelling units. Just because you allow it doesn't mean it's going to be on every single piece of property. It's an added right where people have the ability to have that additional flexibility of development.
Yeah, to follow up on Mr. Casada's point, overall, when we look at the designations that are being proposed, I'm largely in agreement. But I would say that the Sherman corridor being designated mixed use when we really do have well-established, although higher density apartments and condos and obviously a lot of single-family homes, I'm wondering if we should take a deeper dive into that and push the mixed-use designation a little further south from Sherman. But the problem is I don't know exactly what that looks like or how we would implement that, but I can certainly see that allowing a mixed-use corridor designation completely along Sherman. I'm not sure if that's an appropriate designation or not, but that's just my opinion.
All right, other comments? All right, I think we can move to the next topic if you wish.
And I'll say, I was out there again today because I knew that was a question to investigate, and think we could revise that area, looking at the types and a little bit more closely at the lotting.
That'd be outstanding.
There hasn't been a whole lot of conversation about the Woodward corridor. I'm not sure that it differs much from the existing designation in the existing future land use map, unless you see an opportunity to expand on that in certain areas. One thing I will comment on, and we'll talk about it when we get to the designation of activity centers, but that certainly changes the intersection of Woodward and 13 and Coolidge. But the category of Woodward corridor fairly mirrors what we have right now. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that as well. I'll bring up the descriptor too, not just the map. So right now, we don't allow multifamily housing, other than we allow for multifamily over a ground floor use. So the ground floor is office or restaurant or retail, and the upper level could be, as a special land use, some type of residential. The description would allow for more multifamily housing along Woodward Avenue. And I know that was talked about extensively yesterday as well.
Any comments?
Just if you have any questions about it, in general, the description there was to, like other corridors, to try to concentrate not through force, not by disallowing the commercial uses, but to encourage a concentration of those commercial uses into the nodes that are identified in purple on Woodward, as opposed to the other areas in between, which could, if the street condition were to support it, change to less commercial, more housing, with the commercial concentrated in those purple nodes, and then in the red area, which of course a huge portion of the red area being Corwell, which isn't exactly mixed use, but it's kind of part of the center of that corridor. So you can see in the lighter pink areas that those are where you would sort of discourage a great deal of new commercial in preference for other intersections where there's a greater prevalence of success of commercial there, but not through force, just on the other corridors, but through recommendation.
So Woodward has always been zoned general business, and it's been our kind of anything goes place. If you want to put something big there, a car dealership, tire store, whatever, that's been where we put it. And this seems like a pivot, and I'm just trying to get a handle on how we make that change. To lower intensity uses, the potential for residential uses, the challenges that we have in assembling sites, given that those parcels are one parcel deep with parking problems. I mean, how do you envision this playing out?
Well, the goal is to reduce the amount of curb cuts and access and all that, and the parking spillover to neighbors and such. So it's really more making it available to the market should there be a number of empty properties that aren't being utilized and somebody has the opportunity to assemble those, but that would entirely be private enterprise.
And how might we have not seen that happen. You've got scattered spots all along Woodward, a little business here with maybe a little bit of parking, and then, how do we make that happen? Is there a way to incentivize developers or to classify this in such a way that makes it clear that there are advantages to following our vision and disadvantages to, for example, not clustering as the plan recommends?
Yeah, I'd say there's a whole tier of different ways that you could approach it. In part, that whole discussion on what becomes of Woodward in terms of the streetscape and so forth is a pretty big part of that. Then we get into the sort of allowances, and of course you can't downzone them, so it's not really about downzoning, but more so there are certain issues like the parking spillover and such, and so having those requirements specifically on this corridor as we're talking about what the parking reform may be around the community, that this is one place that it is particularly critical to have some standards that are making sure that there's enough parking for that business, which because of the size of the sites may discourage those businesses from opening and therefore be a better fit for residential uses that have a lower parking demand. So that's one tool with the rules that aren't restricting property rights, but sort of continuing what one should be enforced from parking anyways, and encouraging a use that fits better the property size.
And I'm sure that the concept of the slip lanes, that is creating a local lane there, will, if we could pull that off, would incentivize that growth, and that would be great.
Yeah, it's hard to do a lot without a big change to the corridor.
Right.
And I think that's kind of what people have realized in other surrounding communities the same. The corridor itself, the characteristics of the street being a problem, that's the participation in the reemergence of that, the group that created the complete streets and so forth, coming back is an important part of that.
Okay, thank you.
All right.
I think logical to move on to what we were just referring to as the nodes. Two different types, neighborhood node and neighborhood main street. Two different classifications. Perhaps there can be a little bit more of an elaboration on the difference between those two and what they're trying to accomplish. I'll bring them up on the map. They're both of a purple shade, and you can see the logic behind the designations, but the clarification in the two and how they hope to achieve different goals. So we've got the lighter purple, which again is in the area of growth, and it's the neighborhood node, versus the darker purple, and I'll hover over the darker purple versus the lighter purple. This is just the south half of the city, the neighborhood node versus the neighborhood main street. Matt, maybe you can highlight the difference in those two and how they achieve different goals.
Yes, the difference is in scale. The main street being bigger, so slightly taller buildings and more a greater amount of commercial than, say, the nodes. The nodes we envision would have, and this would, come down to how the zoning responds in the future, but we recommend that those have some restrictions in terms of the maximum square footage of businesses to encourage smaller business, as opposed to the Main Street, which might have a slightly larger allowance for the maximum square footage for any particular tenant. And then also looking at the mix of uses that are specifically allowed in those zones. The goal being to encourage the nodes to be smaller scale, smaller business, also including some housing, and Main Streets to be more active, a little bit more more commercial, still housing, but really more like a consistent Main Street frontage, like a block of buildings with ground floor commercial, for instance, as opposed to the nodes, which may be a little bit more of a mix, perhaps more ground floor office, like lawyers' offices, or engineers, or whatever else it may be, to have a small office, or salons and these sorts of things that are a little bit less intensive in terms of the commercial activity.
And I'm going to point out that it comes back to a lot of the logic that you presented in yesterday's response to a few of the questions of having, and I'll bring up on the screen here. I think this is really helpful to illustrate why you selected the designations you did at the different intersections, and they illustrate different walking distances. If you live in a neighborhood, what you're walking to, and the scale of what you envision people walking to based on where they live.
Yeah, no, we didn't identify here, and maybe that's worth doing slightly to differentiate the node versus the Main Street, which we could do in a revision of this diagram. This is really showing that the activity centers are places that have a bigger draw than, say, the neighborhood nodes or Main Streets, which have a smaller draw.
That's kind of a nuanced difference between these two, and just so I understand here, that those what appear to be relatively slight differences only in degree would be implemented by code revisions to specify that. Like you get 3 stories, not 2 stories, or you would have to develop something, the city would have to develop some sort of zoning ordinance that would advance these slightly different types.
Yeah, and it has to do to some degree with the existing businesses in these locations, where they are more intensive today and where they are less intensive in part. But part of the reason to provide the differentiation is to be able to have some commercial where it is today, but your neighborhoods in a manner that is more compatible, where the scale is relatively low as opposed to areas where it's a little bit more intense. So to be able to differentiate between the scale and compatibility for the neighborhood.
All right. Okay, seeing no other comments?
The next area of growth that's identified is the activity center. And there are a few activity centers, and Matt had referenced, and perhaps you can elaborate on the other 2 locations. You referenced just a moment ago about the 13 Mile and Woodward intersection, and how it's anticipated to take on a different shape based on this future land use map compared to Woodward Avenue or those adjacent nodes at the different half-mile intersections. But there's 3 key activity centers identified. We'll look at those on the map. They also correspond to this walking distance map that we just looked at. But the 12 Mile and Stevenson region, and 13 in Woodward, of course, and as well as 14 and Delamere Coolidge intersection.
Yeah, they're differentiated from downtown in terms of scale. Each of those wouldn't necessarily have to be, say, the same intensity, because they do have different contexts. And I think one of the goals in the Delamere area is not to be too intensive, to still keep it a relatively modest scale in height. The Campbell and 12 location is already commercial, some light manufacturing that's changed over recently to smaller business. That's not necessarily to say require the conversion of the grocer or anything, but just to allow for more uses and the addition of housing in that area. And then 13 and Woodward, that area is to say a larger concentration. So this is where Woodward Commons is and Corwell and a lot of the uses are on there. To say this is a logical place with the park and everything to have a higher intensity of use and building. So as opposed to other parts of Woodward, that could have some taller buildings and a greater degree of commercial, but still allow for housing.
All right. This would include the ability to put some sort of housing in there, and that's a characteristic of a lot of these things. Is you would suggest permitting housing in residential housing in these nodes in the neighborhood and in the activity center, which we don't have right now for the most part.
Yes, yeah, and then on here we had mapped the mixed-use node on the other side of Coolidge. I think that could be part of the activity center. It could be the node that has more to do with sort of scale transition more than anything else. And we had mentioned transition a bit yesterday when we look at the next category, I think the next logical category. I do want to clarify that when I was talking transition, I mean zoning rules that restrict building height and setbacks in order to have a step down effect from the zone that might be on the corridor, one lot deep, to the residential district right next to it, to ensure that where those meet, that there's a respect of building setback and height reduction going towards that residential zone. And it's not a transition in multiple zones. More so, it's a transition that is based on setback and height restrictions within the mixed-use zone.
Is it safe to say that the activity centers, especially the one at 14 and Delmere and Coolidge, is to create a walkable density? So not density for density's sake, but the opportunity to have density where people can walk and live, play with the park nearby. That's really the focus of where we're headed with the activity centers.
Yeah, so I mean, you can think of something a little bit smaller scale than Washington, but sort of akin to the lower scale Washington for 2 or 3 blocks of length that may be surrounded by smaller multifamily, some townhouse units, some small single family, but essentially housing that is nearby to a Main Street condition.
And the text description of that, I'll bring it up, highlights how the recommendation how parking would be handled in an activity center. Let's zoom in.
Yeah, which is for the most part just like you have in downtown. It's a lot of structured garages, but also surface parking, but ensuring that the surface parking is not along the street, but behind the buildings relative to the street, so the street remains walkable.
All right, I'll just make a comment here. I mean, we're trying to find in the growth areas ways to increase housing opportunities, and this makes sense to me that, hey, it's a commercial area, it's not too intensive commercial area. If you want to put some residential in there, somebody wants to live in there, that makes a lot of sense to me. I used to live over a pizza place when I was younger, so I mean, people are cool with that. On the other side, we just talked about on Sherman, that's really residential, and if you're going to allow commercial in there, that's sort of a different story. That letting commercial into residential as opposed to letting residential into commercial. So I think that's probably something that's going to get some attention one way or the other.
Yeah. So really, where a mixed-use corridor is mixed use as opposed to having more of a mixed density.
I'm just saying that.
Or not being mixed use at all?
Sherman, there's no commercial on Sherman
Right,
that
yeah.
I know of. And if you're going to allow, it says, the mixed use would allow businesses on the first floor. Somebody who has a condo there's some nice condos there, but if they decide to turn it into a salon, that would be allowed under that?
Yeah, so from a mapping standpoint, that perhaps the edge is a better, well, we haven't discussed it yet, but perhaps was a better category to not have commercial at the ground floor there, which is really not the intent. It may have been some of the parcels abutting 11 Mile. There we certainly want to allow for some ground floor commercial, but I think refinement of the other parcels that are mapped that, yeah.
Okay, that was my thought. Anybody else? All right, onward.
We'll turn our attention to the areas of preservation. I think the same comment can be made for the neighborhood edge classification, which I'll zoom in, might be a little hard to differentiate the colors, but the darker yellow, the mustard color that you see on the 11 Mile Road is a mixed-use corridor. The lighter color tan extends along a variety of our half-mile, north-south streets like Campbell and Stevenson. And that does include the language of limited commercial. Also talks about infrequent, well, let's just bring up the language on the screen.
Yeah, these are mostly properties facing onto the major roads, many of which are commercial today. We don't want to encourage new commercial, so that may be zoning, the zoning plan designation in terms of not allowing rezoning to new commercial in those areas. I don't think that we marked that, and that may be a correction to do there, which is to say that today, if it's not zoned commercial, that it wouldn't be eligible for rezoning to commercial on those neighborhood edge corridors. I think that would be appropriate. And so the distinction for this particular type is to ensure that the building heights are lower and the lot coverage is lower, as opposed to the mixed-use corridor. So not bigger buildings to allow for housing infill, but to keep the scale down.
All right.
I'm sorry, you're speaking of which now?
Oh, the neighborhood edge. So
edge.
that's the lighter color. That's
Like along Campbell?
yeah, it's along
Okay.
all the major road corridors.
And then there's a reference from the design perspective of siting new buildings closer to the roadway. How does one interact with the challenge of the existing building formats and placement are overwhelmingly offset from the roadway to that transition to having a siting the buildings closer to the property line? How do we deal with that interim of the difference of the two?
Oh, it's just an incremental situation,
With good design standards.
Yeah, well, that's where the sort of form-based standards come in, and it's important in that area to really think about the position of the building relative to the sidewalk and the roadway and its height, what is done in the space between the building and the sidewalk. Like that whole design is something that you look at from a form-based perspective in terms of the requirements that make that a viable use on the corridor, and then over time it can evolve towards that.
Which jumps a tiny bit ahead to the logical suggestion of wider sidewalks given the intended pedestrian intensity on that corridor in that region. So there's a suggestion of wider sidewalks logically in a downtown or a activity center, and progressively smaller as we get to areas where it's less intensive and pedestrian. So you had just referenced on that neighborhood edge designation, and if I remember correctly, that one suggests a slightly wider sidewalk than our standard width of 5 feet. Yeah. And so that's to create the opportunity. How do we deal with the constraint given limited right-of-way widths and minimum number of lanes that we need to maintain? I totally understand the idea of placing the trees and having an appropriate green belt and a wider sidewalk, but oftentimes we're constrained by given circumstances.
Yeah, I think you need to look at that. I mean, I don't know how many zoning recommendations I can give you, but that's one that's sort of there, sort of capital improvements. It depends on what you've done with the roadway and can do, if that's viable for a diet or not, depending on the road that you're talking about. And then in terms of the zoning, whether or not that additional space or space at all for a tree, you may not have space for a tree today, and may want for that to actually, say, occur on the private property side of things, or the sidewalk sort of extends in that direction. I think that needs to be looked at on a sort of standards basis. Maybe there's a fee and lieu system for that. I think there's a number of ways to handle it. It's mostly done in zoning if it's not in CIP though.
There was a lot of conversation in our neighborhood meetings that you heard from residents about preserving their existing single-family neighborhoods, and one of the things that they mentioned the most are mature street trees. So to maintain what we have, which we heard a question about that yesterday, and that same conversation of if we're trying to create a different walkable corridors where there aren't trees right now, really focusing on the opportunity where we can put trees in the future. Does anyone else have any other thoughts or suggestions on that area preservation, specifically the neighborhood edge?
I think we're good right now.
Okay.
We'll have to let it sink in.
So we'll turn to the neighborhood residential. We heard a lot of feedback of why can't we call it single-family neighborhoods versus the designation of neighborhood residential. That question was certainly answered many times over before and additionally yesterday. But I don't know if anyone has any further thoughts on that. We can look at the description in the document.
All right.
Another area is the industrial. We have two general industrial districts right now.
Excuse me,
Oh,
do you have
sorry.
a comment?
I do, just a brief one on the neighborhood residential designation. And it's just a basic one in the sense that neighborhoods are often made up of many different types of buildings beyond just a single-family home. So I think using neighborhood residential, that nomenclature seems appropriate to me, especially in light of the discussion that we've had around different ways of having single-family neighborhoods sort of coexist with still residential use types, but more than just single-family. So I think it's an appropriate designation.
It exactly describes the Sherman the Sherman right there. It's exactly what it is. So
I will point out again the zoning plan that we specifically in there say that that the single family types are permitted, but there's a restriction on the others. They exist, but restricted in that zoning plan. So that is something that's referenced in rezoning requests.
all right.
The other area of preservation is our industrial. Our light industrial base is focused right now on at the intersection of 12 and Campbell, and then 14 Coolidge and 14 Delamere area. We're looking to switch that north segment over to, for the most part, over to an activity center as well as the one at Campbell. That would leave the triangular section between Normandy, 14 Mile, between the railroad tracks and Coolidge. And those are very large, and the one is a utility center that I'm sure is going nowhere anytime soon, and the other is a very large manufacturer. And the other was the old drive-in theater, if anybody can remember, that's now Light Industrial Park. So logical that continues as light industrial. And then lastly, we have noted with parks and schools. We had a couple comments of a few inconsistencies, but the parks and the schools are certainly identified as areas of preservation on the future land use map.
And was that the inconsistency just probably GIS things and like it's off a little bit?
It was probably that existing land use database from SEMCOG that was inconsistent, that was passed on, and so we just make those modifications. Unless anybody has any other conversation about the future land use categories or the map specifically, I think it would be wise to once again, Matt's gone over it before, a question was brought up about it yesterday and you clarified it, but the key element under the State Act is also to have that zoning plan, which is shown in those two tables in the document. I think it would be wise to once again have a little discussion on that, clarification, make sure everyone understands the purpose of it and the requirement of it. So I'll bring those up on the screen.
Are you talking about which ones, which pages?
30 and 31.
Okay.
So Matt, could you kindly run through again the purpose of, we've identified the areas of growth and the areas of preservation. So this particular page relates to areas of growth, the existing zoning district or current zoning district in comparison to the future land use category that's being proposed.
Yeah, so the zoning plan should be used in consideration of rezoning as one of the tests against a rezoning request. Does it match the future land use zoning plan? So here we have permitted, restricted, and then we have a sort of special designation about compatibility with goals, 30 and 31. So what we're showing in the first page, there aren't any of the R's. There's no restrictions. But there are P's and S's. S is a special consideration. That's for the special redevelopment zone and the plan unit development zone. Otherwise, if you look at the P's, we can look at any of these. Let's say the activity. Well, the neighborhood node has fewer. So this has the allowance of multifamily residential, office service, neighborhood business. Not neighborhood business 2, but the first category, and then mixed use 1, not mixed use 2. So the lower scale version of those zones. So if somebody has a property in what's neighborhood node, and let's say today they have a zoning of 2-family residential and they want to rezone to mixed use 1, then the zoning plan says that should be a consideration that the future land use is concurrent with that rezoning request. But if somebody wanted to rezone to a mixed use 2 in that situation, then it wouldn't be consistent with the zoning plan. And that's something that the future land use would say should not be allowed as a rezoning. So that's the way that the zoning plan is intended to work.
All right, I might need some practice with that, but.
And then the other page are the more limited areas, the preservation areas. And you can see specifically in the neighborhood residential that it's 1-family residential, 1-family large lot. Those have the Ps. The Rs for 2-family and multifamily say that it's restricted to properties that are already zoned in this land use. So this would only, following the zoning plan, would only allow for rezonings within the neighborhood residential to 1-family or 1-family large lot. So, essentially what's there today. The neighborhood edge, as you can see, has 2-family, multifamily, office service, and neighborhood business. The neighborhood business 1, the lower scale one, not the neighborhood business 2. So again, like on the prior page, this is about what should be permitted in terms of a rezoning request. Another piece of this is, I know that the plan unit developments, the PUDs, as we've discussed, have been a concern in neighborhoods. So on the zoning plan, in neighborhood residential, we don't list the PUD as an applicable zone within those areas. but on the neighborhood edge, it is for specific consideration by the Planning Commission and City Council. So again, this is about referencing the future land use in terms of whether or not a rezoning is appropriate based on city policy.
All right. Any comments on these? Comments on the comments? All right.
Those are the two main categories that excuse me, that I believe that required the largest focus tonight. And there, obviously, each chapter provides some recommendations or actions. Those are summarized at the very beginning of the document and obviously included in each of the chapters. There haven't been any direct comments or objections to any of those suggested actions. Just want to affirm once again that tonight's a good opportunity to talk about any and all of those if you wish. If you're satisfied with the way they're worded, that's terrific, and we can proceed forward with those.
I think we discussed a few weeks ago the need to prioritize, and that's an important thing to do with the actions between this draft and the second draft, to prioritize the actions. And I believe there are ways that we could simplify in some ways, like presently we're referring to the entire statement along with a reference number. And so something could have like 10 statements under it, even though it's like one action. And I think we could do better to simplify that on the sort of beginning action table to be more clear. So it's really not like 8 pages, it's probably 2 pages. And we can refer out to the other sections, but we don't have to restate, the entirety of every statement from further on in the document.
I appreciate you bringing that up. One of the other things that we had talked about a few meetings ago as well was the interest in having some more details on 11 Mile Road, as well as a general topic of the south end of the city. And so that'll be coming back to you in the future as well, but you might want to give perhaps some more direction as to what you would like to see come back for Matt tonight, so that when he and his crew go back to the drawing board, they have a clear understanding of what you're focusing on, those, especially those 2 topics.
And I have spent some more time in both areas while here for a couple days, specifically because it's been discussed.
All right. Commissioner Douglas.
I just want to talk a little bit about bicycling. We heard a fair amount about that last night. And also we recognized, I think in our discussion, the challenges of connecting the region for people who cycle. And I went out and looked at SEMCOG's plans, and SEMCOG does not really have a course of action for helping communities connect, which I think is the important thing here for us as a region. So they have a map that shows cycling routes. And I will say that a number of years ago, when we established the north-south path through Royal Oak, I was on the committee that made that decision. And the choice that we made was the least bad decision, to bring that route up Washington, across on Euclid, and then north on Main Street. And I'm not inclined to ask the consultants to do more than they have already done, because I think the solution to that is beyond our scope at this point. But it behooves us as a central, really, in South Oakland County to maybe work together with our neighboring cities. I mean, I look at the bike lanes in Ferndale, and I wonder, well, how are we connecting that for people passing through the region and passing through Royal Oak? And I think it's bad. I don't think it works, and I think we need to fix it, but I'm not looking to this plan to fix it. I do want to commend the consultants for their concept of the neighborhood connections, because, yeah, there are people who are, there are people who drive, 40 miles on a night on a bike ride, but there are many, many more people who just want to ride with their kids, their bike to the park, or they want their kids to get safely to school. And I think we haven't talked much about it, but I think that that connections, that neighborhood connections idea, I really encourage people to look at it, because I think it it's a strength, it demonstrates a strength in our community with the parks that we have, with the street grid that we have, and I think it's going to be a real asset to us. So I want to compliment you on that.
Thanks. And, in the connections, we did identify the connections that were existing to other communities. In terms of future connections, I'm not, beyond the ones that we have, and they're sort of identified with arrows on the map on page 93, to neighboring communities, and the connections we're making are on the greenways. Although I do believe some of what we didn't mark and probably should are the blue ones, the on-street bikeways that are already planned that do connect to other communities. And so there's a few additional connections, those blue ones to identify. I think that we've captured the ones that exist with neighboring communities, looking at their plans. But certainly any other recommendations or scrutiny on that is welcome.
Okay, good, thanks.
All right. Thanks for that comment. We have another point.
Based on Matt's suggestion, do you want to talk about the actions that were identified in the document? Prioritizing those?
That's a lot of actions there.
A lot of
Yeah, it's more like the headlines in terms of the broader action. So that's where I said we could probably get rid of a good portion of these because they happen elsewhere. Like the first section is just saying here's what doing the future land use accomplishes, where the plan calls for something that would be accomplished by the future land use policy in general. Then the next heading is about public education and outreach. A lot of this is from the SCAP, but there's some additional public education and outreach related to other aspects of the plan. Not a lot. Quite a bit is under the form-based code, which is adopt a unified development ordinance to streamline and improve zoning. So there's a lot there. That's where I think we could lose a great deal of the detail in this action, and rather point out to the other sections. I think we could also, given discussions, provide more clarity in terms of the need in the activity centers and the nodes and the corridors, and the optional sort of nature on the neighborhood side. So to be very clear about those two, that decision to be made. There's a number of pieces that starts on 11 into 12 in terms of downtown recommendations grouped in the category of create a downtown plan. So that's really, here's a lot of recommendations that we've put together, but really it should have a specific plan, with the DDA in terms of implementing both these recommendations and also other goals that they may have in the downtown area. Then there's details after that on updating the recreation plan. And this has to do, the recreation plan update is due in a few years. And so this is looking at the distribution of facilities, of amenities, amenities for people of different ages and abilities through different parts of the community. So, as opposed to saying, what does this park have, but more so, what is the distribution of these facilities throughout the community? So that's a lot of what this is talking about. Then there's the tree canopy piece, which has a lot to do with the diversity in trees and filling in gaps in the canopy, especially along streets. Stormwater solutions to study, and then a lot of details on 13 and 14 in updating the non-motorized transportation plan that has to do with all the bike infrastructure, street crossings, those sorts of details. And then there's a list of additional things to study, and a list of policies, partnerships, and potential programs. So I tried to group them in different subject matter, but a lot of them can kind of be folded up into one thing, like the code or the downtown plan. Though some of the latter ones have more specifics. They didn't quite categorize as well, other than pursue this through the CIP in the future, or pursue these partnerships, or consider these future policies.
Right, and here's what I would say. I've looked this over, and we have just everybody thinks does their math different in their head, right? And I'm sure you have your way of organizing, and I have a different way. You have goals. You have A, B, C, D, E, F, G goals, and then this is all, by the way, under introduction. This is all under the introduction. So you have the goals, and sometimes the goals are reflected in the headings, and sometimes they're not. I sort of was thinking that it might be easier to understand if we had the goals and then had the summary of actions for those goals or associated with those goals under the heading.
The reason I didn't do it that way is if you look at the numbering, some of that is clear, like adopting the future land use. Most of those show from chapter 3, which are all related to one goal. But if you go to, let's say, the zoning is in chapter 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. So that is accomplishing aspects of 4 different goals, for instance. And so that was why I kind of did it by the general thing, the thing to do, like this plan or this, or the zoning, or the recreation plan, because that actually addresses more than one goal in the plan. And so when you're doing, say, the recreation plan update, then you should be referencing these various goals in the master plan, because that recreation plan should support multiple goals. That's kind of why I sliced it the other way.
Okay, well, yeah, there's always overlap, but, all right, that's my comment.
What, if anything, needs to occur tonight? Would you like the Planning Commission to achieve tonight with regard to that list of actions?
Well, I think anything that you all think, like the organization or the prioritization, or the sort of high-level pieces, is there anything at that scale that you think should be handled differently or addressed or looked into, or you think may be missing from that broader list? And so I've discussed some of the takeaways that I've had from our conversations so far, really just asking if there's additional takeaways.
Do you think it's appropriate to go through the goals for each of the chapters? They're 1 or 2 sentences at the most. Do you think that that's something that you would like to accomplish tonight, to review the goals? So, for instance, we have on the screen on page 6 the goals to achieve the different sections of the plan A, B, C, and there's just 1 sentence regarding each of those chapters. If you'd like, we can talk about those. If you feel comfortable with the way they're worded, we can move forward.
What page are those? Are those on a summary page?
6 and 7.
Sure, I'll show them on the screen right here. So it says goals are simple and achievable, and implementation of which are enumerated in the details in subsequent chapters. So right below that will go, as Matt had indicated, A, B, C, and so forth. So the first one, for the chapter regarding reinforcing the city structure, there is a goal to retain and refine, et cetera, et cetera.
Which is, and the goals are tied to the chapters in the plan. So reinforcing the structure is really the future land use piece. So it ties into that chapter.
Yes. Because the goal is important, it relates to the suggested action. So being comfortable with the establishing a goal is relative to then looking at the actions to achieve that goal. So I think it's important to look at both, starting with the goal.
That makes sense. Start with the goal.
Just wanting to make sure there's nothing glaringly incorrect or that needs anything that needs to be modified or sharpened with any of the goals.
So I do have one question on that topic with regards to the verbiage we're using for activity centers. So the activity centers is, I guess, nomenclature that's relatively new to the master plan, or at least it's a term that we're using that's somewhat new. And so the way the goal is stated, to reinforce an activity center, my question is, should we consider sort of restating that a little bit, because we're sort of creating this new designation of activity centers, and reinforcing it would sort of indicate that it already exists and we're trying to sort of support it. Whereas right now, I think what we're actually trying to state is that we're more or less creating these activity centers and we want them to be successful. So just throw that out there, and maybe slightly reword that to either create and reinforce, or in some way sort of indicate that this is a somewhat new thing that we do want to be successful. Hopefully that made sense.
I understood what you're saying there, but I mean, we do have, the activity center currently encompasses some things that do already exist. We're just renaming it.
Sharpening it to achieve a different outcome.
So it strikes me that is true of the activity center around the hospital and the activity center at 14 in Coolidge. I don't necessarily know that that applies as much to the activity center at 12 Mile and Campbell. I think that's much more work in progress. And so maybe doesn't deserve, as Mr. Cantina suggests, the reinforcement, but in fact a reinvention.
Yeah, I mean, before you said reinvention, strengthen came to mind as a simple term, but that may be applicable, though that is a reinvention in that case.
I mean, I'm going to say redefine or define. I hate wordsmithing on a committee, but
yes,
here I am.
Yeah, well, we can take the feedback and spend some time thinking about it.
Good, you do that.
Yeah.
Well, what do you have next?
If there are no more comments with regard to the goals, then I think those are established. And coming back to the suggested actions.
Well, the one goal, like G, we didn't have a chapter on that. That's what we've discussed about the whole issue of where growth is planned to occur, and the issues with PUDs today, and aligning future land use and zoning and all that sort of stuff. So there's not a chapter on that per se, but it's something that's referenced in various places elsewhere. It was still a goal that we thought important to elevate because of its importance overall in the plan, but it doesn't relate directly to a chapter like the other ones do.
All right, Joe seemed to understand that. All right, well, there's a lot of stuff there on those pages 8 to 18 there. Like I said, I have read them, but they're all shorthand.
Perfectly acceptable. If you don't have any direct comments on any of the items
I
at
don't
this
have
time,
any direct
it's
comments
perfectly
on them
acceptable.
at the moment. So we're still in a feedback loop here, so we have the public to hear from as well. So
Yes, absolutely. There's nothing to say that you can't modify these, delete these, add new ones in the future. Absolutely correct.
Mr. Cantina.
So with what Matthew just said, actually, it's sort of bringing up a question for me in the sense that, aligning the policies, obviously that goal makes sense. There's not a chapter on it describing that more. But when you look at all of the other goals, the reality is policies would need to be aligned in order to be able to affect all of these other goals and accomplish all these other goals. So it makes me question if that goal G needs to be specifically stated the way that it is, considering it doesn't have a commensurate paragraph to go along with it. And I don't necessarily want to go and restate all the other goals, but within all the other goals or in some other way sort of reference that policy alignment is a critical thing amongst all of these goals. If we're not going to be able to actually execute any of these things, these goals as stated, unless we align the policies as well. So it's kind of a recurring theme amongst all of them. So is it a necessary separate goal to state? Food for thought.
Very good. Other comments from the commissioners?
The city commission on a semi-regular basis goes through a planning process as commissioners. Typically, we do this at the beginning of the year. It's often a driver of the budgeting process. That is, we provide policy input, and the staff takes that and puts it into the budget, capital improvement plan, and so on and so forth. And so, obviously, our plans involve more than just sort of land use and the physical condition of the city. But when we speak of aligning policies, a substantial portion of what we have here today will weave its way into our strategic plans. And I would anticipate that we will, we have a new city manager coming in. I anticipate that we will go through that discussion, that brainstorming process at some point with our new city manager. So, saying we need to align policies, may be a foregone conclusion. And many of the action steps, I think, will wash out as city commissioners look at our strategic plans and then look at potential action steps and find ways to weave them into the budgets, which is the crucial thing, and staff will do the same thing as well. So I think, saying we need to align policies is not a bad piece of advice.
That was in part I knew that that needed to be elevated in some way, and whether it's a goal that's similar to the others, it's sort of like an underpinning of a lot of it, So I think it needs to be elevated somehow, whether it's in that list or not. I'm not tied to, but just that it needs to be upfront in some manner.
All right. I think we're petering out on comments here on this side of the table.
I don't have any other further topics to critically address unless Matt wants to identify anything in particular that you can't leave here without.
No, I think these are the critical pieces. I think we've gone through various details. I have a lot of info going into writing another draft, and we've given folks a good hour and 15 minutes of dry conversation.
All right. So are we ready to move on? All right. Okay. So I think this is time for the public comment. And you guys, you can go first. So hopefully everybody, this is a lot of verbiage here. Hopefully people have read it. And let's talk about it. Come on up, introduce yourself, and you got 3 minutes.
Good evening. Trish Oliver, resident for 40 years, or almost 40 years. Thank you to the more than 100 attendees at last night's Planning Commission meeting. The concern and stamina of the residents was truly appreciated. Although the meeting was titled a town hall, it wasn't a true one, but rather a controlled exchange where participants had to submit their questions on cards. It was not a give and take. The question and answer format was a marketing technique to sell predetermined outcomes and didn't represent a format for a real town hall meeting. The most important next step in the master plan rewrite process is at least 2 real town hall meetings so that there can be meaningful public input, as took place after the first draft of the current master plan was made public in 1999. This is the most important time for input, but you are shutting us out by not providing these opportunities. 20 years ago, there were 36 public input meetings, most of which took place after the first draft was published and were scheduled at various large venue locations such as the Senior Center, the middle school, the high school, the Women's Club, Baldwin Theater, the Library Auditorium, and OCC Auditorium. The first of the 2 proposed real town hall meetings should have a mailed notice to every single-family homeowner in Royal Oak. The notice should describe the proposed elimination of single-family zoning districts and all other changes that affect a single-family homeowner. For the second real town hall meeting, notice should be sent to every property owner within 500 feet of any of the roads that are proposed to be narrowed, including Woodward Avenue, and/or roads subject to high-density multifamily development next to single-family neighborhoods. The farmers market would be a good location for these meetings. We came for information last night, and the responses that were given to us were not presented in a clear, concise format, especially when claiming it is necessary to eliminate single-family zoning to allow for the small number of older pre-existing apartments in single-family areas near the downtown. Too much cell was included for the commissioners and the consultant's current position without listening to what our concerns are. We've heard everything that was said, and the vast majority of us still agree, and we speak for them, that you need to put single-family homes back in the master plan, not just in the text, but back in the future land use categories and in the future land use map, and not just leave it for the zoning. On the final note, on page 7, under G, align policies, which is a goal, please add homeowners to the line, making it read, recognizing that the city developers, business owners, homeowners are partners in building Royal Oak's future. You've left out homeowners in that line, and I believe you've left them out in the process too. Thank you.
All right,
Also, may I turn this in for?
certainly. All right, who's next? Right there.
My name is Sheila Savari, and I'm a returnee to Royal Oak. I want to talk about ADUs. I lived in a neighborhood in a different city in a different state where about every second or third house had an ADU, but they weren't called that because that phrase hadn't been invented. They were called garage apartments. They were the second floor of people's garages. These were homes built mostly before World War II. They were not a problem. None of us neighbors had any issues, and in fact, this was a great benefit to a lot of homeowners, particularly senior citizens, who had an income stream. They had young people living just steps away to mow their lawn and take out their trash, and it added a sense of security, particularly for seniors who are single, to know that someone was nearby. It was a benefit, and I never saw anything negative about these accessory dwelling units, as we now call them. And the second thing I'd like to address is my fellow boomers. It's about time that you realize we cannot pour amber over this city and preserve it. Sure, we'd all like to go to Kleba's and buy a typewriter ribbon, but we can't do that because this isn't about us. This is about people who are in their 20s and 30s and 40s, and it's about their children. And if you could stop being so self-centered and self-righteous and find your generosity.
Ma'am, you got to talk into the microphone.
Find your generosity and your compassion and realize that in 10 years from now, a significant portion of us will either be full-time in Florida, in assisted living, or will be dead. This is about the future. You cannot change that. This city's been changing since the day it was incorporated, and it will continue to do so, whether you like it or not. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. All right, we'll get Mr. Hartman there. Still got to introduce yourself for the record.
I'm Bill Harrison. I've lived in my home at Woodward Side for 44 years. I've been a resident of Royal Oak for 83 years. And my house, in my will, is going to go to what is now my 29-year-old daughter or granddaughter. So I'm thinking in the future, and I've got two questions. Number one, ADUs. I read the staff comments, and somewhere in the staff comments, it's talking about having ADUs, and I'm not sure of the term. It was whether the nodes or whatever, which would imply that there would be a concentration of ADUs. And Joe, you can help me out here on whether it's going to be in the nodes or whatever, which would essentially be developing a trailer park at the edge of residential areas. And the other thing is ADUs come in built on ground, or there are trailer ADUs. Is there going to be a precluding of trailerized ADUs? Just a question. Now I'm having a Biden moment. I'm forgetting my second point. You'll have to excuse me. Anyway, I'll just have to pass at that. Thanks.
All right, thanks. Okay, please introduce yourself. You got 3 minutes.
Hello, my name is Richard Hine. I live at 713 Maxwell. I want to point out that on page 27 of the draft plan, it claims that over 90% of the dwelling units in Royal Oak are in single family. The census indicates that only 69% of the dwelling units in Royal Oak are single family, suggesting that we already have 3 times as many multiple family dwelling units as the master plan draft suggests. There's another very troubling aspect of the neighborhood edge and mixed use corridors. You're suggesting reducing front yard setbacks, possibly eliminating front yard setbacks. And elsewhere, there's a suggestion that street trees can somehow make up for that loss of front yard, and that is not possible. In fact, the city forester, the last city forester here, recommended to me not to plant trees between the sidewalk and curb in front of my house on Maxwell, because it would be competing with in-ground gas and water lines. And there's no way that the tree lawn can make up for a loss of front yard. And the loss of those front yards would be very detrimental to the character of our residential areas. And I note that that was suggested all along 13 Mile Road, where at present we have a mix of single family and multiple family dwellings, but they are all appropriately set back. I don't see why there would be a proposal to eliminate those setbacks and change that character. With respect to the sewer system, while it's noted that the sewer system should be separated, elsewhere it suggests that we could have stormwater detention in some of the city parks, which has to be recognized cannot be done until the sewers are separated, because what you'd be detaining in the city parks is a combination of stormwater and raw sewage. And finally, with respect to ADUs, I think there's some potential for ADUs, but there's not much in the master plan that indicates how that would be accomplished. There are some graphics that indicate a few, but there's not much meat there.
All right, thank you. Other comments? I know you're out there. There you go.
apologize. These have been great speakers, and it's been since high school since I've talked to a commission. My name is Zach Chop Adams. I've been a resident of the city for 12 years, both as a renter and a homeowner. While some of the questions and comments last night irked me, several sparked thought, specifically two. A question from Ms. Wagman regarding accessibility, and a comment from Mr. Ellison regarding who is this master plan for, which combined for a topic near and dear to my heart and a short story. In my time as a renter, I was graced to have an amazing neighbor, Gene Watson, a Royal Oak native, graduated from Kimball in 65, moved out of state for work. Following the passing of her husband, she returned back to the city, moved into an apartment as she knew she was not able to maintain a single-family home, but was more spry than a lot of people, even for her age, and did not need assisted living or a ADA-compliant quarters. In the time that I knew her, she was president of the Royal Oak Women's Club, the Royal Oak Musicale, and the Southeastern District of the Michigan Federation of Music Clubs. Sadly, she passed away at the beginning of last year, but her local involvement I still hear about today. I tell Gene's story because it is impressive, but it's not unique. There are many seniors and people of different disabilities in this community who participate in every aspect of our city. These people choose to live in apartments, condos, duplexes for whatever reason they may have, and unfortunately are stuck with accessibility blocks, since many of them find themselves sometimes less important or not having a stake in the city. It's wrong and offensive. However, the proposed master plan does do a good job in expressing the future of various types of housing in the city. I'm not going to bring up the location and size topic that's been brought up more than enough, but I will bring up the lack of focus for seniors, especially those wishing to age in place and those with disabilities. The weak level of inclusion, improving accessibility outside of the scope of the ADA is problematic. I wish for the betterment of the community, and I really suggest the commission suggest further accessibility broadly within the master plan. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Come on up.
My name is Bob Stuglin. I've lived in Royal Oak for over 60 years. The last two speakers talked about senior citizens having access. This planning commission voted to okay an apartment zoned at Genesee and Rochester Road, zoned for 16 units, agreed to let developers build a 42-unit, 4-story apartment building. No elevators, no indoor stairs. Where's the accessibility? Where is it? Where is it? It's not there. Talk about that. Ask about that. Ask about that. Where is it? 42 units, 4 stories, no elevators. Stairs on the outside. You're hypocrites. You're all hypocrites, every one of you.
All right. Hold on, folks. Let's keep that to a minimum, please. Who's next? Right there.
Hello. Hi, I'm Alex Morford. I've been a Royal Oak resident and homeowner for almost 6 years, and I'm also a member of Yimby-Oakland County. Overall, I like the master plan draft. I live near 13 Mile, and I believe the future land use of mixed-use corridor will benefit my neighborhood and allow more neighbors to enjoy our great amenities like parks. I encourage you to keep multifamily allowed in all areas currently shown as mixed-use corridor, and if possible, I believe you should expand to allow multifamily in more areas of the city. Additionally, I would like you to expand Neighborhood Edge west of Main Street and north of 13 Mile. Several lots immediately north of 13 Mile do face Main Street, and most of the other lots have driveways onto Main Street, even though they have addresses on the other street. This area is amenity rich and would benefit from more neighbors. I appreciate the focus on bike and pedestrian safety and would like to emphasize my support of lane reductions. After the meeting last night, I crossed without a crosswalk in the dark because I needed to get home after getting off the bus. And today we have inadequate pedestrian infrastructure north of 13 Mile in Rochester. Hopefully we can solve this soon. Finally, I think Royal Oak will benefit from ADUs, and ADUs should not be restricted to only family members of the homeowner as tenants. Thank you for your time and looking forward to seeing this new master plan completed.
All right, thank you. Right there.
Hi, Jeannie Dolson, 126 North Connecticut, and a 35-year resident of Royal Oak. I want to add something to what I was going to say. Is I'm in support of ADUs. I live in one of the few neighborhoods in Royal Oak that already has them. They've been there a long, long time in the Whittier neighborhood. And as far as I can see, they've never been a problem, and I would fully support having more ADUs in the city. But I was here for 2 hours last night, and I thought it was really thorough, and I really enjoyed the explanations and learned a lot from them also. What I really like being included is the Sustainability and Climate Action Plan, and then also the trees and planting section that was included. I think people complain about their trees being cut down, but those silver maples are old and hollow, and then you can get a new tree planted very easily. I also like the fact that you included that map with the access to parks in the neighborhood. I think Royal Oak is a city of parks, and it's important for our neighborhoods to keep them and add more like we have been. I live 4 houses off of a neighborhood Main Street near 11 and Campbell. And I wouldn't mind at all if a few more multi-story apartment buildings went in on 11 Mile instead of the empty for sale office buildings that have been there for a couple of years now. But thank you for having these 2 evenings of explanations. It's very helpful. Thank you.
All right, thank you. All right, don't be shy. Who's next? Right there.
Hello, my name is Lisa Mason, and I've lived here for over 40 years, starting as a renter and owned 2 homes in Royal Oak. And I just want to voice my overall support for the master plan. I'm really pleased with the vision and the goals of the master plan. I like this very strong commitment that's clearly expressed to protect and preserve the character of the existing neighborhoods, which is a primary goal. I feel very comfortable with that. I'm glad that's there. And I'm also really glad, and I think it's appropriate, that the issues of mobility and sustainability are featured center page as key goals. I want to commend the Planning Commission members and the consultants on the open process. To me, it's demonstrated a very clear commitment to gathering community input. There were a variety of methods that you used, comments and surveys. I didn't know what a charrette was. I had a lot of fun at the charrette, learned what that means. And last night's town hall was great to see so many engaged residents attending. The particular concerns that I have is the need to have more affordable and accessible housing for seniors and the entry-level options that we need for young people so that they can live in our city. The people who work here can afford to live here. So I'm glad that you're open to ADUs. I think it would be appropriate to embrace this even more emphatically, and I encourage these to be citywide as much as possible. I think we could go even further to encourage attainable housing in attractive locations. The modest family housing units that are house-sized, if I understand correctly, the missing middle housing, should not just be limited to placement along noisy roads. It could serve as a transition in the single-family home neighborhoods. So to conclude, I'm proud to live in a city that's forward-looking. It's undergoing a thorough and thoughtful approach to planning for our future, and ensuring that we remain one of the most popular Metro Detroit cities to live, work, and visit. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Who's next? Right back there. Come on up.
Hand up.
Hi, my name is Sean. I'm a resident of Royal Oak, live in Maplewood, Northwood area. I'm a homeowner. I just want to give my general support for this master plan process. I appreciate that it recognizes that we do have an affordability problem in Royal Oak, and it recognizes that we need more housing options in Royal Oak rather than encasing our city in amber. We need to embrace change, and I do appreciate that this master plan does do that. I appreciate that it recognizes that climate change is real, and we need to start preparing our city for that. And that's something that I appreciate the focus in there. I also appreciate the fact that it gives voice to we need more transit options rather than forcing everybody to own a car and have to drive everywhere. Looks like regional transit is starting to pick up more steam in the area, and I'm glad that the master plan is looking to prepare our city for that. Again, just some specific suggestions. I'm a single-family homeowner. I recognize, this plan preserves and protects single-family neighborhoods. I got a good way to help with that. Let's build more single-family homes in our single-family neighborhoods. When my house was built, it was under 1,000 square feet, which under current zoning rules would have made it illegal to build today. So why don't we take a look at the single-family zoning requirements? Let's look at those minimum lot sizes, those minimum square footage. Let's allow single-family homes that used to be built to be able to be built again in Royal Oak. I think a big issue of affordability is we don't really build smaller homes anymore. Part of that is because the city restricts that. So let's take a look at that, and again, let's build more single-family homes in our single-family neighborhoods. Woodward Road Diet, totally in support of that. Just to answer some concerns about this, I used to live in Ferndale, and I was there during the beginning discussions of that road diet. A lot of concerns, the same ones that are brought up at the last meeting. What about traffic? What about emergency vehicles? Ferndale had already done a road diet in Livernois and 9 Mile. There were no issues with that. And now, especially 9 Mile in Ferndale, that's the main thoroughfare. It's the business center. It's the residential center. It has grown significantly since 9 Mile was put on a road diet. And traffic moves a lot slower through 9 Mile than it used to. The same thing with Woodward. I take Woodward for work. There are no issues with traffic. And as somebody who does visit Ferndale, it's a lot easier to cross Woodward in that manner. So I just wanted to voice my support for that. And then just in general, we can't demand that we have more police officers. We can't demand that we need more firefighters, that we need more nurses, we need more teachers, unless we build the housing. And then one final note, the schools in this master plan, let's at least consider neighborhood edge around schools. Let's build a little bit more housing near schools. That's what I have. Thank you.
All right, thank you. There were two hands up. Red first.
Hi, Ed Steinke, 1215 East 6th. I'm in favor of the ADUs. I'm recently retired, so I have a family that would love to have me move into an apartment with them, but I can't afford to have that happen. Pre-COVID, I had the house plans to renovate. My offset in the front was 1 foot onto the easement. They wanted me to demolish my front porch in order to have the renovations done for 1 foot. So my lot size is not large. If I have an ADU put in, will the lot size issue once again be a problem? And will the frontage offset be a problem with that also? So as I say, I just want to say I think ADUs are important to keep us seniors in the city, because I couldn't afford to go anywhere else. And I don't want to be put in that position to where my family has to jeopardize their income for me to move in with them. So, thank you.
All right, thank you. Then we had please introduce yourself. 3 minutes, please.
Yeah, hello, thank you all for being here. And there's been a lot of great speakers so far. My name is Zane Dufour. I've been a resident of Royal Oak for 7 or 8 years. I don't exactly remember. I've been a homeowner for 4. I live just next to the Rochester Road Diet. I think it's been really great. I walk my dogs like 3 times a day along there, and so it's been a huge improvement in my quality of life. I also spend a lot more time walking to the businesses near 13 miles, so I'm spending a lot more at local businesses because it's more pleasant to spend time along that street. I think one of the things that gets missed a lot in these conversations is that, but I think it's been highlighted by some of the earlier speakers, is that the restrictions that we've placed on housing construction harm everybody, essentially everybody except for landlords. Landlords benefit from housing supply restrictions because they increase the cost of rental housing. But by allowing more housing construction, we would both allow for the decrease of cost of entry-level housing for renters while simultaneously increasing the value of homes. And that might sound like a paradox to some, but the reason why this works out is because the way that housing supply affects the way that housing supply restrictions affect the value of the land versus the housing component of someone's property are different. So I think it's just like really want to hit on this fact that like empirically, essentially all mainstream economists agree that lifting housing supply restrictions is good for homeowners, it's good for renters, it's good for businesses. It would be very good for the city of Royal Oak to adopt this master plan. I'm a bit of a fundamentalist. I really believe in the free market and the liberty of property owners. But thankfully, if you are not a free market fundamentalist like me, I think you should feel perfectly safe approving this this master plan because it is a small c conservative master plan. I think this is the best way. This master plan is probably the best way that we can maintain the character of Royal Oak without falling into decline. That's I think all I have to say. Thank you so much, and thanks to all the other speakers so far.
All right. Right there.
Hi, my name is Susan Clarko, and I am a 10-year resident of Royal Oak. I am a special ed teacher that works with students with severe multiple disabilities. And what I'd like to say is that I don't really feel like your plan really does address the accessibility of our seniors and of people with disabilities. I agree that, I mean, for instance, like parking, you have to have a really wide area for parking with somebody in a wheelchair. They have to be able to access it either from the side or the back. So you can't say that you're going to have, I have 2 minutes. You can't say that you're going to have an apartment without parking. It has to be close. You have to have an elevator. It has to be accessible. I think that we need to have another town meeting to address some of these issues. I mean, I think you've worked some of it out, but not all of it. All right, thank you.
All right, thank you. And we had a hand right there. Please introduce yourself, 3 minutes.
Sure. My name is Susan Gilbert. I've been a resident of Royal Oak for 26 years.
And I looked at the language in both the Aging in Place plan and in the master plan, and comparing and contrasting how they discuss the missing middle and senior housing. And I note one part where it says that it's attracting developers that will bring that type of housing, if you will, to the community. I think it's important not only for our seniors, but it's important for caregivers. If you have a parent or if you have a relative or you have another close person in your life that you need to live close to you because you're their caregiver, having that affordable housing will benefit all of those people. SEMCOG says that the aging population is going to continue to increase in Royal Oak. And I believe the people that are moving to Royal Oak, that number is going to increase as well. So we need to be able to address both those factions, those caregivers and those people that need care. Thank you.
All right, thank you. All right, I thought there somebody else had a hand up. Don't be shy. Oh, great. I think you were first there. All right.
Okay, Janice Wagman. One of the primary goals of a master plan is to address the lack of housing, but the shortfall is primarily affordable housing. ADUs, according to our consultant's comments last night, are expensive and will be few if allowed. Royal Oak has issued housing permits for 1,748 new units since 2010. Except for the new one that's going in by the courthouse, only a few were affordable. Given as a city we cannot mandate developers to build them, how many more do you think we need to add before the economics of supply and demand will actually lower the cost of housing to an affordable status? And is our infrastructure equipped to handle it, or are we just adding density? Regarding single-family neighborhoods, to me, there is absolutely no reason why areas that currently do not have duplexes and small multifamily developments within single-family neighborhoods should not have their own designation in the future land use map. You're just opening it up to more zoning appeals. Regarding accessibility, my number one thing, the plan mentions parking 144 times, but does not once mention accessible parking, especially in the downtown. Instead, it recommends eliminating accessible and closer surface parking. I'm saddened staff's notes failed to mention it or object when you are well aware the city is not going to add on-street handicap parking, especially in the Main Street area, except for the 2 by the post office. Many seniors and the handicapped are tired of being told to just go park in a structure when some are unable to walk that far and or are uncomfortable parking in an unsupervised structure. It fails to mention universal design principles and practices, which makes housing units and buildings accessible and usable for the largest possible audience. Applying universal design might allow some seniors to downsize, freeing up housing for the next generation. Also, I recommend adding an accessibility study that would address issues like greater accessibility within the parking structures. The doors are too heavy for many to open, and I found only 4 handicapped accessible doors in all of our parking structures. These are just a few of the missing components I would like to see added in this plan. The Americans with Disabilities Act was a landmark moment in the history of civil rights in the United States. Before its passage, individuals with disabilities often faced numerous barriers, including limited access to public buildings. The act was introduced to eradicate these societal impediments, ensuring that people with disabilities have the same rights and opportunities as everyone else. This plan should do the same. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, please introduce yourself. 3 minutes.
Hi, my name is Katie WROK. I'm here on my own and as part of YIMBY Oakland County.
I'm a homeowner in Royal Oak. I have a young child who will attend Royal Oak Public Schools starting next year, and he currently attends a daycare in downtown. I am invested both monetarily and emotionally in the future of this city. I want more neighbors. I want more housing options. I've owned my home for 2.5 years, and honestly, I'm a little tired of the yard work already. I would love more family-friendly, multi-family housing options where my family could walk or bike to school as we can now, and to parks, restaurants, and entertainment. I want the teachers at my child's school and our police and firefighters to be able to afford to live in Royal Oak. I want the freedom to safely get around outside of my car. I already bike year-round and I'm relatively comfortable, but every week I encounter aggressive or inattentive drivers. These people endanger my life and the life of my child who rides around on the back of my bike. There is not one block of protected bike lane in Royal Oak. I'm hugely in support of the neighborhood greenways, but I'd like to see enhanced protection on routes with destinations and businesses because people biking want to go to those places too. If Royal Oak built safe, maintained bike infrastructure that my 4-year-old could use, so many people would use it. I biked to Arts Beats and Eats a couple of weeks ago, and the bike corral was completely full. The attendant had to find a special place for my giant bike. Every person walking or biking is one less car. This means less traffic and less competition for parking for those who choose to drive. And on the flip side, if we allow more businesses close to housing, as in the neighborhood edge and provided in the plan, then even people not as daring as me might choose to access a destination outside of a car. There are also many people who cannot drive, including some seniors, some people with disabilities, and all children. I'd like to say a particular thank you to Commissioner Douglas for your comments about cycling in Royal Oak. We do have the chance to lead the region on this, and particularly how we are in the center and connect so many other communities. In sum, I support the master plan draft and its emphasis on housing options and commitment to non-motorized transportation. Thank you to everyone, to the consultants and the planning staff and the commissioners who've worked so hard to get to where we are today.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Halleck.
Good evening, Tom Halleck. One of the things you need to be careful of with this Woodward lane reduction, you need to really study that very carefully. The gentleman was up here talking about how wonderful it was in Ferndale. I just went down to Ferndale twice in the last few days, and when I tried to leave the parking lot west of Woodward, north of 9 Mile, at 6 o'clock in the evening, there were 3 cars ahead of me. It took us 23 minutes before I could turn right onto Woodward. 23 minutes, 4 cars. Now, if you go up Woodward between Webster and 13 Mile, between 5:30 and 7 p.m., you're going to encounter a 4-wide traffic jam that is almost a half mile long, and it stays that way for about an hour and a half. Now you're going to condense that down into one less lane. Is that backup going to go all the way to 12 Mile for an hour and a half? So you need to have a really good grasp on what you're considering doing with there, because that chokes up really badly. And if it takes 23 minutes to get 4 cars onto Woodward, not turning left, just turning right, then you need to be very careful and cognizant of what you're doing.
All right, thank you. All right, oh, right, there you go. You come on up, introduce yourself. 3 minutes.
Yeah, good evening. My name is Alex Schneider. I live on Knowles. So here's what I'd like to say. There was no consideration given in this master plan for the outdated sewage system that we have here in Royal Oak. We don't have combination sewers like they have in Troy and some other communities where the storm drain water is drained into a different sewage system. So therefore, the city is depending on the existing sewage system. If the city increases the population by building these multi-story buildings, apartment buildings, that would put undue strain on the existing sewage system, undoubtedly. 2014, we've seen some very interesting situation with the sewage. A lot of homes got damaged, a lot of basements. But that was due to nature. But now we have nature multiplied by new construction in the city that was designed initially as single-family residential city, by and large. So no foresight, no consideration was given to the existing sewage system and how it's going to receive the new sewage rate from these new buildings. So obviously this master plan lacks a lot of things, and at this point it has to go back to be looked at once again, and residents have to have a say in it, unlike what was done before. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you. All right. Way in the back. Come on up. Please introduce yourself and give us your 3 minutes.
Good evening. I'm Pat Wall. I've lived in Royal Oak for 50 years. When we came here, it was like a big town with a wonderful heart. It disturbs me when I see words up here about historic, and I know the main theater is gone, and other words up there that really I know not to be accurate. I like the idea about having another kind of a meeting where you can have a give and take, because of course when you come up here and you get 3 minutes and you're a nervous wreck and you didn't know this was going to happen, I was told just to pretend you're all naked, and that should make me bolder. Yesterday I went to the Meyer shopping center there at Coolidge, and someone was coming out of the cannabis store, and he was a very young man, and we exchanged a look. He waited till I went into the driveway of the store before he lit up his cigarette and crossed the street. Now remember, we had a van tour of the city showing the problematic areas. And I remember how much less they afforded, you all, I guess, afforded the space between Oakland Vocational School and the cannabis store and the grow deal that they have going on. And that's very disturbing. One thing is, that was a rule that was broken because it didn't appear that the vocational school had the same standing as regular public schools. And that's very disturbing, because it seems as if that you don't honor the children who might be vocationally interested and into trades. And you put this really close. And now, did I understand that you want a 300-foot away, or no, it has to be 300 foot away. You want a activity center, was that what it was called? And so you can't answer my questions, so this is very sad. I would like to be able to talk with you. I'm a person who likes to hear something so I can be accurate and a little more comfortable. But if that's going to be an activity center there, you got a really nice, beautiful vocational sign there. Although it's really pretty and everything, but it's right across from the cannabis store and the cannabis grow. These are our children, and yes, they're very important. And we're all important, and we're all neighbors, and we deserve to have the same kind of respect and care for each other. Thank you.
Is that a hand? Yes.
Hi, my name is Amber Long. I am a Royal Oak homeowner. I started out as a renter. I don't have a ton of things to say about the master plan other than I like the potential of it. I have 2 children. One is a 24-year-old, and he has saved tens of thousands of dollars to buy his first house. He wants to buy a condo. He is currently still with a big chunk of saved money, is still priced out of Royal Oak, and he works in Royal Oak, and he would love to stay here. So the potential for new housing that could keep my kid here, I love it. I'm sure he loves it too. He doesn't want to move too far away. I have a daughter who doesn't have anything saved and is probably going to be a renter. So as a former renter myself, I love the idea of having options for her, whether it be a dwelling unit on our house or somebody else's, or a duplex or an apartment. That kind of option is great for her. So I like the potential of the master plan. I appreciate the pocket parks. I appreciate more green spaces. I appreciate third spaces where people can get together and meet each other outside of work or a bar. I love that idea. I also love that the planners have taken into consideration biking and walking, and then with those little neighborhood edges, I can't remember what they're called, but just different places where neighbors can go to meet each other. So I like the first draft of the plan. I'm excited to see the rest. I'm excited to see the diversity in housing that Royal Oak has, and then an option for my kids to stay and live here as well. Thank you.
All right, thank you. All right. Got more comments? I'm sure we do. Right here.
Hi, Mike Thompson, 1210 Irving, Lawson Park Homeowners Association, southeast corner, professional architect as well. Tonight, I think the master plan draft is still flawed. 2/3 of this city is single-family zoning. So to put it all in one zoning, neighborhood zoning, is a big mistake. There's a lot of mixed uses in there. The overlay districts for existing non-single-family properties exists. It should be carry on. The goal is number one goal should be it should be preserve single-family zoning. So the current current zoning is our assessment. It says, talks about what type of heater we have in our house, how big the bathrooms are, et cetera, but it says it's the one-family zoning as well. This is a contract that says what you bought and your deed restrictions and your protections of what you're living in. I don't know if we can legally change it to a different type of zoning. The type of zoning restricts heights, lot coverage, setbacks, the quality of life. This is a 1 to 20 scale model of my neighborhood. So it's a community. It's a close community, continuous investment, fully developed city, 100-year-old house, green space, tree lined. What happens now is duplexes come in, or should I say accessory dwelling units. So suddenly we're changing to neighborhood zoning. It's a loss of community. It fractures the continuity. And now we're putting in duplexes as well. We're losing privacy. Privacy was a #1 issue when we had a lot of construction in the South End with turning over the old industrial core. So now you're losing privacy, you're losing the morning sun, the evening sun, you're losing noise protection, the heat sink, cross breezes, you're competing for parking. And finally, especially the folks that aren't here to study if they live on an edge, if they live on the edge of the neighborhood, we're going a lot of multifamily, we're doing planned unit developments, and we're packing them in, and it's great to hear by your folks that we want more housing, but we can do it without destroying one of the best things to live in this great city is our protective single-family zoning, the codes, regulations, restrictions, and our whole quality of life. So preserve it and then rewrite your master plan, Mr. Lambert, to get more types of single families. Some are pure. Thanks.
All right, thank you. I'll let you pack up there while we're waiting. Okay, who's next out here? Right here.
Mark Nelson, I've been a resident here for 35 years, and it just doesn't seem to make sense to me to put in multifamily dwellings and then narrow all the streets, because you know you're going to have more cars, more people, and you're narrowing the streets. I mean, I live off of Detroit Avenue on Rochester Road, where the party store sticks out almost to the street. And for me to get out, I've got to pull way, almost out the front of my car into the street to look and see if there's cars coming. They told me the road diet's going to move the curb 5 feet on each side. Well, the only place they didn't move it is there. And it's the one place that should have been moved. So I still have the same problem of trying to pull up to the street and look and see. I block the sidewalk, people on their bikes come by, yell at me, walking. You know, I have to pull up to be able to see, but now I have a line of cars instead of 2 or 3 cars. And like the one guy said in front of you, sometimes I sit there for 2-3 minutes in the morning if it's rush hour, because I got lines of cars going both ways. You'll put in that big apartment complex, I'm gonna have 42 more units there with how many, you know what, another 80 cars trying to compete driving up and down there? And like the one guy said with the sewers, you take a bank that had, what, 2 toilets? Now you're putting in 42 buildings, 42 toilets, 42 showers, 42 washers, 42 dishwashers, sinks. All that water's going into the city sewer. And you want to tax me for having rain fall on my property. If I have concrete, you're going to charge me for how much concrete I have, because that's extra water going into the sewer. But yet you'll build these big places where they're just dumping water daily. Mine only happens when it rains, but these places are doing it daily, and you don't seem to care. But, you know, tax me, let these guys get away with it. That's all I have to say.
All right, all the way in the back there.
Nancy Poprovsky, concerned citizen. Voices like in real town halls should have been heard instead of cards. Too many long discussions were made by DPZ. That time should have been fairly divided with the public's voices so they could further explain their often misinterpreted questions and then express their own point of view. Some answers were given without enough research or experts present to give real, sometimes more educated facts. DPZ saying the Delamere Mini Main Street project is okay because there are already established businesses there. First of all, it's mainly light industrial. Nothing like traffic for retail. In fact, most of the traffic on Delamere is cut through from Meyer and the Gadsby Cannabis Store. For people who live in Michigan who know and love Meyer for its prices and its famous one-stop shop slogan, do you believe the proposed mini Main Street on Delamere, right next to Meyer, will have vacancies soon due to competition? A panelist stated, after question, the city didn't have time to send out mailers. First of all, you had to be asked by the public for a town hall, which should have already been in the works, like the last master plan. Second of all, if there wasn't enough time, you should have fairly moved the time to a later date so the entire public was aware and could benefit. That should not be the public's hardship. This master plan could be one of the biggest impacts on all of our lives, good and bad. One of the panelists talking about LED lighting and how directing the light is the answer to its problems. Please listen to why this won't work. I called my granddaughter today, and I asked her opinion. She loves and respects nature and wildlife. So I asked, if you were a bird or squirrel in a tree trying to sleep at night, would you like lights pointing up or down? She said, down, so they can sleep. And I said, well, if you were a raccoon or possum looking for food at night, would you want the lights pointing up or down? And she said, up, because lights scare them and they see good in the dark. And then I said, before you go to bed, and Daddy says, let's look at the stars, which way would you turn the light, up or down? And she said, I turn them off. Good answers. My granddaughter's only 6, but luckily has common sense and compassion and can figure out direction of lighting doesn't help. I'm also saddened that some panelists were more worried about saving money on LEDs rather than protecting the environment. And on YIMBYs in the audience and their affordable gig, they support 3-story buildings with no elevators, 3 possible affordable units where the builder, after 6 times asked, will not reveal the rent. And 300 residents were ignored by the city when welcoming new neighbors, but not wanting 2 tall buildings. Also,
Okay, thank you. Pete,
YIMBYs said that he's forced to have a car. You're lucky. I wish I could walk when I was younger, like when I was younger. Can't do it now.
Okay, thank you. All right, who else would like to come up and give us their input? Looking for hands? Don't be shy. All right, well, I guess, oh, yep, one more. All right.
Bob Green. I've been here about 28 years. Concerning the sewer system, I've experienced it myself when the city's broken water main and flooded my basement with sewage. And I come to the city and they're like, hey, that's too bad. You know, go clean it up. So is that the attitude that's going to be had here when you overtax the systems and people's basements get flooded with sewage and they come to the city and say, hey, you guys did this, and you say, hey, too bad. That cost me $4,000 last time. 2014 was a different story. This was done by the city. So yeah, that's where I stand, to let the people know that the city's not responsible for anything. Thank you.
All right, thank you. All right. Next. All right, well, we have got a lot of good comments, but it looks like we don't have any more. So, thank you very much. I'll close the public hearing and we'll bring it back to this side of the table. And I guess I'm going to look for my staff folks for a little guidance here. What else is on the agenda? Because it was, I think that was the last part of the agenda.
You are correct. As long as Matt feels comfortable with the comments that were absorbed today and has the ability to come back with a modified draft for you, perhaps you can give us an indication of what that time frame might be.
Yeah, so like I said, we're looking for input direction from you all in making modifications to this draft. You know, we have plenty of notes from the meeting a few weeks ago, from last night, from today, in terms of what those modifications should be. So then, you know, our goal is to say, you know, from you all, proceed to modify the draft and bring back a second draft of the master plan following the input that has been received. That would be probably need about 2 months of time to get that done and sort of see how that works into schedules, which is, of course, right in November, so it's got to be after elections, but that's sometime in November we could have a second draft assembled for review, share back with you all, publish on the website.
All right, that sounds good to staff?
Yeah, there are a couple things that were inspired by the public comment that I'd like to suggest. And you may have this in the document, and I just want to confirm that it is there, having to do with the capacity of our infrastructure. We heard people talk about that tonight, and I always remind people that there was a time when there were 80,000 people living in Royal Oak, and now there are 60,000 people living in Royal Oak. So we do have the infrastructure capacity to handle larger population, smaller household sizes as we. So if that's not in there, please make sure it is.
Yeah, but we did address the stormwater issue both in the combined sewer system and in green stormwater, which are two separate solutions to it. I did note from these conversations to review the wording and actions related to those to make sure that that is much more clear and apparent in the actions and in that portion of the plan.
Excellent. And the other thing is you mention, so far as I can tell, only in one sentence in passing the aging in place plan. And yet that consumed as much time and to my mind has as much importance as the sustainability plan. And I would like to see elements of that woven into what we have here, especially in terms of physical accessibility and housing availability.
And I guess go ahead.
Oh, go ahead, sir. If you had something to say, I can wait.
You first.
Thank you. Yeah, and to follow up on Ms. Douglas's comments, we had 24 unique speakers. We heard everything from ADU discussion, single-family zoning discussion, road diet discussion, sewage discussion. So I really want to thank all of you for coming out and sharing your thoughts with us. Ms. Oliver, you mentioned homeowners on line 6 in the aligned policies. I happen to agree with you there. I think that, there are many different entities in the city that need to be consulted, and certainly homeowners are one of them. We had 3 speakers come out and specifically state their support of single-family zoning. I, for one, look forward to the designation of single-family zoning disappearing and moving into residential. Single-family zoning does have a history of being exclusionary and problematic. I think neighborhood designation recognizes the fact that families come in all shapes and sizes. I think Mr. Gantina made that abundantly clear with multi-generational families, and I think moving into more appropriate language just makes it clear that we are a welcoming city no matter what your family looks like, and I'm glad that that's going to be happening. Thank you.
All right. I would just follow up on the last 2 comments. Yeah, we had a lot of comments today from the public that were different than we hadn't heard before, and a lot of different emphasis. And I thought it was very pleased to get more input. That was great. So you were listening, right?
Yeah, and taking notes.
Yes. Okay. Any other comments? Okay, so what is our plan of action here? Our consultant says he needs a couple months to work on this. Do we have anything to do in the interim? Is there another method that public can have input online? Is there still an online
The
input
website's
system?
still open for comment. Mm-hmm.
It's still open, okay.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. Anything else from the commission, staff, or consultant? All right, that actually exhausts our agenda. So that's the end of a 2-part meeting. So if somebody were to make a motion, they could make it to adjourn at this point. He's afraid. Okay, motion to adjourn by Mr. Esby. Is there and seconded by Mr. Ellison. Okay, any discussion on the motion to adjourn? Okay, hearing none, I will call for the vote, voice vote. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Thank you very much, and thank you very much.
You got up.